Welcome and thank you for stopping by Sheila's Audiobooks, and I am Sheila. This recording is coming from South Texas. All stories on this recording are in the public domain per United States copyright law. This story is about Pink, called Little One by Big Medicine. Both of the Flying U outfit, accidentally discovers a grim secret about his friend and stands by him who is in sore straits. Big Medicine left for the purpose of riding bad horses, making pretty shots, drinking what whiskey came his way, playing games, any game for money, and, most of all, for heralding his exploits with his megaphone voice. It was extremely hard to believe that, with so much turbulence upon the surface of his life, any kind of skeleton could rattle the bones of Big Medicine. The skeleton. The herd was grazing quietly all up and down the grassy walled coulee which opens widely into the Hagamore Flat, and Big Medicine was due to be relieved, along with Slim, who was not watching the cattle at all, but was sleeping unashamed in the sun at the head of the coulee. Happy Jack took much pleasure in rousing Pink. It was who rode slowly down the coulee rim, looking for Big Medicine and half expecting that he, also, had yielded to the temptation of a hazy, windless day in midsummer. Because there was a possible chance of tormenting the sleeper, with a grass blade drawn lightly across his nose, perhaps, Pink went softly. Big Medicine was sitting upon a hummock of grass, his head propped upon one hand, his elbow on his knee. He did not hear Pink ride up behind him, so that the other was very close before he turned. Pink, looking curiously down at him, saw a picture held loosely in his fingers, a picture which seemed to be that of a woman. Big Medicine was staring at it, lost to everything but his thoughts. When he turned, Pink saw with amazement that his cheekbones were wet and that his eyes glistened. Pink did not know what to do, and so did nothing at all, which was, perhaps, the very best he could have done had he chosen deliberately. Big Medicine started glared resentment, glanced down at the picture, and then deliberately snapped the cardboard in two, tore the pieces with a twist of his fingers, and dropped them to the ground. He set his heel upon them, and glanced defiantly at Pink. Still Pink did nothing. Big Medicine took a deep breath, twitched his shoulders impatiently, and got up. "Ya sure caught me at it, didn't ya, little one?" he said, laughing awkwardly. "Ya wait till you're growed up and get a skeleton that rattles its bones every time you're off by yourself. That's the way to fix 'em, kid. If I'd done that at the start I'd been a heap better off, maybe." He glanced down at the trampled, ragged squares of cardboard. "Ya reckon I'll hear the bones rattling again, little one?" Pink fidgeted in the saddle. "I hope ya won't," he said slowly. Then, as the other still seemed waiting, he added impatiently, "How can I tell? I don't know who she was, or how much ya cared, or—" "Oh. Ya seen it was a woman, then?" "That's what I wondered. Well, little one, I'll tell ya something. That there," he swept his hand downward, "is all I got left of my wife. It wasn't much, was it? And, seeing it made me act foolish, I reckon I done the wise thing when I tore it up. Men I can handle. But memories and women, they sure do play the very devil with a man. You take my word for it, little one, and don't ya never let neither one get a handhold on ya." He twitched his shoulders again. "It's like rotten whiskey, Pink. It has a blamed mean effect, and ya can't get the taste out of your mouth." He turned abruptly and picked up the hanging bridle reins of his horse. Pink dismounted, stood a second beside the horse, then went over and kicked loose a clod of earth from the hummock, pushed it over the telltale fragments, and looked up at the other, who was watching him. "A good scheme with skeletons is to plant 'em out our sight," he explained. "I don't reckon you'd enjoy having one other boys run across these pieces and try to josh ya about your girl, would ya?" Big Medicine laid his hand heavily upon Pink's shoulder. "Kid, you're all right. I'd had gone off like a chump and left 'em there, and I'd likely got into a shooting scrape with the jasper that found 'em and started asking questions. When a man's got the blues he ain't apt to think of little things like that. I'm sure obliged to ya, kid. I wish ya'd do me another good turn. Forget it, will ya?" "I've got about the poorest memory ya ever heard tell of," Pink assured him, and made his dimples bear witness that he refused to consider the incident as other than a trifle. Big Medicine hesitated, decided not to speak what was evidently in his mind to say, stuck his toe in the stirrup, mounted, and rode slowly away toward camp. Pink looked after him commiseratingly, and was tempted to uncover the fragments and piece them together just to see how she looked. He resisted the impulse, however, and remounted to turn back a few stragglers which were making off across the prairie. "No, darn me if I want to dig up other men's troubles," he said to himself. She was homely, chances are, he'd had showed me the picture. A man ain't never much reluctant, I've noticed, to show up the picture of a good-looking woman that's married to him. He could not so easily forget, however. He had never suspected Big Medicine, with his wide grin and his blatant good nature, of ever having rubbed elbows with a trouble which went deeper than anger or revenge. He could not seem to see Big Medicine as a married man. He was not that sort, any more than was Happy Jack, for instance, or Slim. Apparently he lived for the purpose of riding bad horses, making pretty shots, drinking what whiskey came his way, playing games, any game, for money, and, most of all, for heralding his exploits with his megaphone voice. It was extremely hard to believe that, with so much turbulence upon the surface of his life, anything could lie hidden beneath, anything so surprising as matrimony. When he rode back to camp at supper time, and found Big Medicine declaiming loudly that, with his eyes shut and one hand tied behind him, he could beat Patsy making peach pie, and that, if it weren't for the disgrace of the thing, he would short tie an apron around him and learn a bunch what real cooking tasted like, Pink found it hard to keep from looking several times at the man's cheeks, in expectation of seeing some sign of the tears which had made them wet. Big Medicine greeted him with a bellowing laugh, and swept him into a fresh controversy with Calamit over a trivial matter that had already been worn quite threadbare, and Pink decided that there was no skeleton in Big Medicine's life, or, if there were, it was fast going to pieces, and the incident of the torn picture was not as serious as it had seemed to be at the time. Neither of them would have to stand guard that night, and Pink looked forward eagerly to a whole night's sleep. But he found himself wakeful for no reason except his vagrant thoughts, though others slept around him. Because his mind clung to the strange spectacle of Big Medicine shedding tears over a photograph. Big Medicine, of all men. It irritated him to hear the man snoring comfortably, louder than any of the others. There was no mistaking the voice of Big Medicine, even when he dreamed. Pink raised himself to an impatient elbow and listened. "Or, he ain't got any feelings about a blamed thing," he remonstrated with himself. "I guess he was just loading me." He lay down again, and immediately came a vision, startlingly clear and convincing, a vision of Big Medicine's face, surprised into revealing the man of him as he was, with cheekbones wet, and eyes awash with tears. There could be no joke about that. Pink thumped his pillow, and tried to think of something else. It seems strange that night happenings nearly always come when a man, however wakeful he may have been, is just sliding away into sleep. Pink was dreaming irrelevantly of playing a hard-fought game of pool with a drunken Chinaman, when he came back, with a snap, to consciousness. There was the dark, sleep-filled tent, with the heavy breathing of 10 or 12 full-blooded men. Occasionally there was a rasping snort, as some dreamer reached a crisis in his fancied adventures, but it was nothing of this which held Pink's breath. Somewhere across the tent was a stealthy movement, the careful pulling of body which betrayed brain alert and wakeful. Pink lay quite still and watched, though there was no sane reason for so doing. When the head and shoulders of a man rose silently against the dim whiteness of the tent wall, Pink's eyes never left the figure. Whoever it was, he was feeling his way cautiously into his clothes, and it was not time for guard relief. Pink lay like a dead man, with eyes wide open, and his nerves were in such a state that he never once wondered at himself for attaching any importance to a man's rising in the night. The dimly seen form rose to its knees, felt its way carefully over the unconscious bodies of Weary, Happy Jack, and Irish, and lifted the tent flap. Outside was clear starlight. A breeze which had the chill of midnight puffed in and brought to Pink's nostrils the faintly aromatic odors of a dewless prairie. He lifted his head, waited until the other had dropped the flap behind him, then cautiously dressed himself and followed. When he put a tousled yellow head out of the tent, he saw no one at all. He went out, stood erect by a guy rope, and listened. Off to one side, beyond the cook tent, he thought he heard someone stumble, and went that way to look. 50 yards away, headed straight from camp, he saw the man who had left the tent 2 minutes ago afoot, and seemingly in a hurry. Pink followed him as quietly as he knew how. To that moment his curiosity had been absolutely unwarranted, a mere matter of nerves keyed to a pitch above the normal, but now he felt in a measure justified. For to leave camp afoot at midnight, and in so stealthy a manner, was, to say the least, unusual and deserving investigation. Pink walked a bit faster, though he made no more noise than before. Half a mile went the two, and then he halted, half ashamed. Before, he had not been quite certain of the man's identity in that dim light, but when the fellow stopped beside a rock, hesitated, and went down upon one knee to hover groping there, Pink knew at once the man and the meaning. "It's his wife he wants back, what there is left of her," he said to himself. "You wouldn't think a man like him," and I went and kicked dirt on the picture. But then, he tore it up himself, and you'd naturally think he turned suddenly, and went thoughtfully back to camp, crept quietly into his blankets, and tried not to concern himself over the troubles of Big Medicine. It was long before Big Medicine returned and went unobtrusively to bed. Indeed, Pink guessed that it was near daylight. He was sorry for the man, in a vague, futile way, and was prepared to show him more friendship than had been his habit. For, while Big Medicine was frankly sincere in his liking for Pink, the regard was not more than half reciprocated. A man who is close to 24 does not greatly enjoy being called Little One, and treated as a child. But when the camp stirred to life with the coming of the sun, Big Medicine did not seem to be in need of either sympathy or friendship. His grin was quite as wide and frequent, his eyes protruded with the same frank assurance, his voice and his laugh dominated the camp just as they had always done, since his arrival from Coconino County, Arizona. Pink felt somehow baffled and resentful. If the bones of the skeleton rattled at all during the weeks that followed, he could detect no sound, however faint. When a man has a great sorrow hidden deep in his heart, one expects him to show evidence in some form or other. Pink watched him covertly for 2 or 3 days, made up his mind that Big Medicine was just what he appeared to be, a wide-mouthed, empty-headed josher, who could not take anything seriously if he would, and forgot the skeleton. They had gathered the first beef herd, and had driven it leisurely into the Dry Lake stockyards, had loaded a train on a hot, windy day, and, when the great door of the last car slid shut upon the tail of the last steer, they got upon their horses and raced thirstily down the hill to Rusty Brown's place, all save Big Medicine, who had trouble with his horse, and Pink, who waited to make and light a cigarette. The two rode slowly after the others, enjoying their brief freedom after the long, dusty drive. There were horses to be shod, the mess wagon to be restocked, and the day was old. They would have that night, at the feast, in town, and perhaps a good share of the day following. They would quench their thirst as speedily as might be, but they would not set their aching muscles to the swing of galloping when 2 minutes of walking would bring them to their destination. As they turned into the main street, and swung short around the corner of the new restaurant kept by the widow Wilson, the horse of Big Medicine shied and snorted. The rider jerked him back, and lurched drunkenly in the saddle, and a child gave a squeal of triumphant joy. "Hello, Papa. We rode on the train and a man gived me 10 cents, and we runned over a cow and broke her all to pieces. And we slept on a shelf away up, and I falled out, and there's a big little hill on my head. See? Right there. And a man." Big Medicine swooped like a great hawk, and with one arm swept the child up into the saddle before him. With consummate skill, he controlled the horse, which was so terrified that it hesitated between bolting, bucking, and standing upon his hind feet, so that he stood still, with his legs shaking as though they would give way beneath him. The boy squealed again with delight, and hugged Big Medicine almost to the strangling point. "Where's that lump on your head?" the latter demanded, with his voice so hoarse and broken that Pink could scarce make out the words. "Oh, there it is. Honest to Grandma, it's a fright. Ya didn't cry, I'll bet a hosted yer, old-timer?" "No sir, Bob Jones. The water kinda runned out of my eyes, but I didn't cry. They just leaked a little bit. And the man, his face was dirty, Papa. It was just black. He gived me a shiny button out of his pocket." Big Medicine yanked his horse out of a half-formed decision to pitch, and hugged the child close. Where's Mama?" he asked gently. "Start here." The boy wriggled in his arms and pointed toward the hotel. "She's over there. She'll spank me good and plenty, I reckon, when I go back. I runned away, 'cause she telled me to set still and not ask so many questions. A boy can't set still. Make him buck, Papa. Take me for a ride." Make him split the breeze. Is this your horse, Papa? Big Medicine looked down at the boy, and Pink, watching, felt himself choke. There was nothing blatant, no boisterous good humor in that glance. Even his mouth, grotesquely wide and teeth-filled as it was, looked tender and wistful and sad when he smiled. I reckon Mama wants you, old-timer, he said caressingly. Maybe we better go hunt her up. What did you say? No siree. I'll get spanked, sure. Take me for a big, long ride, Papa. Big Medicine lifted his head and looked around, as if it had occurred to him that they might excite curiosity if they stood there longer. But, save Pink, who waited, no one was in sight. The horses of the Flying U drooped heads at the long hitching pole in front of Rusty Brown's, but not a man was in the street. He turned, and his eyes met the big, blue, sympathetic eyes of Pink. You come along with me, little one, he said. You're kinda in on this deal, anyway. I'm liable to want some moral support. He tried to grin in the old way, failed, and turned his horse abruptly. Roused by the signal, the horse seemed to recover his nerve, and to lose, in the same moment, his temper. There was a struggle for his head, a jab or two of spurs, a vicious snort. The boy clung to his father and grew wide of eye. He lost his shiny tam o' shanter, and his little legs waved erratically with the motions of the frantic animal. Pink spurred close and held out his arm. Give him to me, Bud, he cried, and grasped the child. Big Medicine let him go, jerked his quirt off the saddle horn, and settled himself to the exhilarating fight for mastery, while Pink rode around the corner of the hotel office, out of sight from anyone who might appear on the street, and waited with the boy before the parlor windows. It seemed to him that Big Medicine, gyrating in the open plot just off the street, was fighting something more than the horse. There was a stern preoccupation in his face which betrayed his riding as purely mechanical. Pink let the boy carefully down to the ground, got off and straightened his rumpled blouse and tie, smoothed down his tow-colored hair which was very like the hair of Big Medicine, and left his horse standing with dropped bridle reins, while he went out and recovered the shiny tam o' shanter. With his shirt sleeve he polished it well and set it carefully upon the child's head, making sure that the rubber band was quite comfortable under the chin. It was not much that he could do to show his sympathy, but he was grateful for the opportunity to lend even that slight service. He was thinking of the time when Big Medicine had saved his life and had asked only his friendship in return. Faint sounds of laughter and loud talk came across to them from Rusty Brown's saloon, and he heard Happy Jack's protesting "Aw, Gwan." The sounds jarred upon his nerves. It was as if someone had laughed out unexpectedly at a funeral. Big Medicine gave a last vicious swish downward with his quirt, held the horse from plunging forward at the sting of it, spurred him up to where Pink stood waiting, with the hand of the boy clasped warmly in his own, and got stiffly down. Pink glanced sharply at his sweat-beaded face, saw that it had come back to its normal expression, except for a certain grim set to his mouth, and sighed his relief. "You're a real wolf, ain't you, Papa?" admired the child quaintly. Big Medicine brushed the back of his gloved hand wearily across his face and looked down at him. "You bet I am, old-timer," he agreed lightly. He turned and looked searchingly at Pink, took the hand of his boy, and started toward the parlor steps. Pink let go the other hand. "You go on. I've got to build me a smoke," he said shortly. Big Medicine hesitated, his foot upon the lower step, looked clown at the shiny tam o' shanter by his knee, twitched his shoulders, and went in. "Don't be long, little one," he admonished over his shoulder as he turned the knob. When Pink went in, Big Medicine was sitting upon a corner of the center table, with his hat pushed back upon his head, his arms folded, and his fingers plucking nervously at his sleeves near the elbows. There was in the room a silence unbearable, the silence which comes between two and builds a wall impalpable, impenetrable. Big Medicine had been staring at his boots. He looked up, grinned widely and unconvincingly, and greeted Pink with boisterous welcome. "Why, hello, little one. Come in. This is Mrs. Manderson, Mr. Perkins. My wife, Pink." Pink took off his hat and bowed hazily. He felt the tight-strung atmosphere, and he was confused by the utter calmness of Big Medicine. The woman, when he dared lift his lashes to look at her, had been crying. Her handkerchief was a tight little wad of white held in her hand, which was drawn up into a fist. Her hair was mouse-colored and straight and fine, and her mouth rather sweet. She was slim and pink-cheeked and wistful, but there was something about her which Pink did not quite like. "I didn't get spanked yet," "But I will when you go away," whispered the boy solemnly, sidling toward Pink. Big Medicine stopped drumming upon his forearms and caught him by the blouse. "No, ya won't," he said, and looked meaningly at the woman. "Say, little one," he began suddenly, in a tone reckless of results. "Had any experience with skeletons? How do you reckon a fellow would go to work putting flesh and blood back onto 'em and making 'em look human? Reckon it could be done?" Pink stammered and glanced sidelong at the woman. I don't know. My wife has kinda got a notion to see me try it. This is kinda unexpected, this meeting here. Seems like she didn't know I was in this country, but now she saw me. John Manderson, you've no right to talk that way before a stranger." The woman showed a flash of temper in her eyes. "He ain't a stranger to me," said Big Medicine. "He's my friend. I ain't got many, but he heads the list." "I didn't know you were here," admitted the woman, "but I heard something that made me think you might be. I thought I'd come and see, and let you know that." She glanced quickly at Pink, standing by the door. "He ain't dead. He wants me to get a divorce and marry him. He thinks more of me than you do, John Manderson." Big Medicine smoothed the hair of the boy, and looked at her fixedly. His big, protruding blue eyes were unpleasant, staring like that. She stared back at him. "It's for you to say," she added, in a softer tone. You made a mistake when you." She stopped short, glancing again at Pink. "Oh, go on and say it. He's my friend, I told you once." He, too, looked at Pink. "What she means is that I shot a fellow and pulled out. I'm from Oregon, not Arizona. I'm on the dodge, for I naturally supposed I'd killed him. By cripes, I meant to. The best shots hit crooked once in a while, when they're excited, and I reckon I must have been, to do a punk job like that. It seems the doctors patched him up again. Here, old-timer," he broke off suddenly to the boy. "You take this 2 bits and go up to the store and buy yourself some candy. Make 'em give you your money's worth, kid." He set the shiny tam o' shanter upon the boy's head, and Pink opened the door to let him out. Opened the door and let in another, a tall, lean man with shifty eyes. Big Medicine stiffened, his hand to his hip. Pink had stepped directly before the newcomer, warned instinctively of the crisis upon them. Big Medicine moved to one side, and Pink moved also. Big Medicine stopped, laughed harshly, and twitched his shoulders. "All right, little one," he surrendered. "We'll continue the conversation, seeing it's so pleasant." The tall man had backed against the wall, and his face was a sickly white. He did not speak at all. Big Medicine turned harshly to the woman. "Did ya come together?" She sprang up and went close to him. "John, you know we didn't. I wanted to find you. Little John kept talking about Papa, and I dreamed every night of you being sick and alone and in trouble with men hunting you like an animal. I couldn't stand it. I thought you would be haunted by what you had done or thought you had done. I wanted you to know that you aren't a murderer, after all. And I want to say that I'm damned sorry I ain't." Big Medicine cut in, putting out one hand to keep her from him. "Ya thought I'd be haunted, did ya? Well, let me tell you, by cripes, that was the only thing made life look good to me when I thought I'd killed him. Or, what do you know about men? Lemme tell you, there's times and circumstances that makes killing a pleasure. That was one of them. And let me tell you, I'd rather face the gallows, right now, than see him standing there in front of me, alive when he'd ought to be dead. Think of it, Pink. Me, the best shot in Oregon, me that dropped that hussar yawn stone dead at 100 yards with my 6-gun, and him on the jump, and then to make a mess of killin' that." He swung his arm passionately toward the stranger, "and him standing not more'n 20 paces up street from me. Why, by..." It was the woman, staring at him, fascinated, stirred by the brute strength of his anger, won by his very ferocity, who stopped his headlong speech. "I'll stay with you, John. He followed me, he has always followed me, John. I can swear that is the worst, only you didn't know and John wouldn't wait to be convinced, but I like you best. I'll stay with you, and I won't get my freedom. Big Medicine turned, swallowed hard, and looked at her. Molly, darling," he hardened again. "Oh, what's the use? Ya got tired of me once. Ya did, or ya wouldn't a spoke to him at all. I believe ya there wasn't nothing but temptation, but if ya cared like ya claim ya do, there wouldn't have been that." He got up, took a step toward the door, and the man who had followed moved farther along the wall, eyeing him watchfully, his hand to his gun. Big Medicine grinned wolfishly. "Or, don't get none alarmed," he taunted. "I'm leaving you for her. She likes you, even if she does deny it. She'll get free of me, all right. You oughta. John, you don't care for me. You never did care. You don't know how to love a woman. If you cared, I'd stay." Big Medicine looked at her steadfastly. "No," he said heavily, "I reckon maybe I don't know how to love a woman. There's some things I do know tolerable well, though. One is that it's a blame poor plan to swap skeletons. I got one, and I'm used to it. I know just the kind of hurt it can give me. But if I took ya back, Molly, I'd have another one on them hands, and I don't reckon I'd find it none easy to live with. Good God, girl. Could you bear to live with me and have the thoughts of him coming up between us all the time? Maybe you could do it, but I couldn't. You're crazy, plumb crazy to talk about it. Ya don't know me, ya don't know any man. I do." He opened the door with a jerk, went out, and would have slammed it shut behind him, but Pink was following close behind him, watching over his shoulder to see that the stranger inside made no hostile move. Big Medicine went straight to his horse, gathered up the reins, and then stopped. "Say, little one," he said, in his ordinary tone, "I got a roll of money here that I wished you'd take back to her. She's liable to need it. I been carrying it on me in case I had to drift sudden, but I ain't killed nobody, after all." He laughed unpleasantly, "so I won't have no use for it. You hand it in to her, will ya?" He fumbled inside his shirt, drew out a flat package, and gave it to Pink. Pink went back, opened the door, and thrust the money into the hands of the woman, who was crying again and dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. "He wants the kid to have this," he said briefly, diplomatically shut the door before she could reply, and hurried after Big Medicine. He found him halfway to the store, leading his horse, while he gravely chose bits of candy from a striped bag which the boy was holding up to him with that air of importance which belongs exclusively to childhood. "That's enough, old-timer. I'll get toothache sure, if I eat any more. You pike along now and give Mama some. Here, let Pink have a piece, first. That's the stuff. So long, kid. I got to go, now." The boy ran off down the path, smiling over one shoulder at his father and, because he did not look where he stepped, fell over a stone. Big Medicine handed the reins of his horse to Pink, went back and picked-lipped the boy, brushed the dirt from his clothes, helped him find the candy which had spilled from the bag, straightened the shiny tam o' shanter, and gave him a hasty kiss before he started him off again. He stood still in the path and looked after the boy until the parlor door opened and received him. Then he turned, reached gropingly for the reins, and Pink saw that, for the second time in their acquaintance, his cheeks were wet and his eyes awash with tears. Big Medicine twitched his shoulders, gathered up the reins, and took hold of the stirrup to mount. "I reckon I'll ride on out to camp," he said simply. When he was in the saddle, he turned and grinned, desolately, down at Pink. "Say, little one," he remarked grimly, "ain't it hell, the way these here skeletons keep rattling when yer think yer got 'em hogtied and helpless and won't quit when yer tell 'em to? Women and memories, they sure play the very devil with a man." He struck backward with his spurred heels, and went galloping away, past the saloon, and on down the street. Pink watched him whip around the blacksmith shop and leave only an uneasy dust cloud to tell of his passing. Then he led his horse slowly over to the hitching pole in front of Rusty Brown's place, tied him thoughtfully, and went in. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really hoped you enjoyed it. There will be more to come. Please subscribe not to miss out on what is next. I will be looking forward to your return. The music is by Madfan from Pixabay. To support this and other artists, go to pixabay.com. Sheila.